The crystal chandelier sparkled above the crowded ballroom as Elena hurried between tables with a heavy tray. Her black uniform was perfectly pressed, but her worn shoes squeaked slightly on the marble floor. She had been working since early morning, and now at 8 in the evening her feet ached terribly. The charity gala was in full swing. Rich people in expensive clothes chatted and laughed while sipping champagne that cost more than Elena made in a week. She weaved through the crowd, refilling water glasses and clearing empty plates, trying to stay invisible. "Excuse me, miss," called a woman with diamond earrings the size of grapes. "This wine tastes awful. Bring me something better." Elena forced a smile. "Of course, ma'am." Right away. She had learned long ago not to take these comments personally. These people lived in a different world. A world where they never had to count every dollar or choose between buying medicine and buying food. As the evening went on, Elena noticed something that made her heart race. The kitchen staff was throwing away dozens of untouched appetizers, beautiful little sandwiches, fresh fruit, and pastries that hadn't even been touched. It seemed like such a waste. She glanced around nervously, then quickly grabbed some napkins. When no one was looking, she wrapped a few sandwiches and slipped them into her apron pocket. Her daughter Maya would love these. The little girl rarely got to eat anything this fancy. "Can I help you with something?" Elena jumped, nearly dropping her tray. She turned to see a tall man in an expensive suit watching her. He had kind eyes, but Elena's face burned with embarrassment. Had he seen what she was doing? "I'm sorry, sir. I was cleaning up," she stammered. The man studied her face for a moment. There was something different about him compared to the other guests. He didn't look at her like she was invisible or unimportant. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Elena, sir." "Elena, you've been working very hard tonight. Have you had anything to eat?" Elena's stomach had been growling for hours, but she couldn't afford to buy food from the hotel restaurant, and the staff wasn't allowed to eat the leftover catering. "I'm fine, sir. Thank you for asking." Alexander Chen, one of the city's most successful businessmen, had been watching Elena for the past hour. He noticed things that others missed: the way she carefully counted her tips, how she quietly helped an elderly guest who had dropped his cane, the fact that she was the only server who said please and thank you to everyone, even when they were rude to her. "There's plenty of food here," Alexander said, gesturing toward the buffet table. "Please help yourself." Elena looked at the amazing spread of food: lobster, prime rib, chocolate desserts that looked like works of art. Her mouth watered, but she shook her head. "I can't eat more," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the party noise. Alexander frowned slightly. Elena was thin, clearly tired, and he was certain she hadn't eaten anything all evening. Her response puzzled him. "Are you sure? You look like you could use a good meal." Elena's cheeks turned red. She could feel the wrapped sandwiches in her pocket, and shame washed over her. This wealthy man was being kind, but she couldn't explain that she wasn't saving room in her stomach for more food. She was saving every bite for Maya. "I should get back to work," Elena said quickly. "Thank you, sir." She turned and hurried away, leaving Alexander standing there with more questions than answers. The rest of the evening passed in a blur for Elena. Her legs felt like jelly, and she had developed a headache from not eating. But she pushed through, knowing she needed this job. The catering company only called her for the fancy events, and the tips were better than her regular waitressing job. Finally, at midnight, the last guest left. Elena helped clean up, collected her pay, and headed for the subway. The city was quiet now, and she pulled her thin jacket tighter against the cool night air. During the train ride home, she carefully counted her tips. $43. Not bad for one night, but not nearly enough. Maya's medicine cost $60 every week, and that was with the discount from the pharmacy. Elena's regular job at the diner paid minimum wage, barely covering rent and utilities. She thought about the man who had spoken to her. Most of the wealthy guests ignored the staff completely, treating them like furniture. But he had looked her in the eyes and spoken to her like she mattered. It was a small kindness, but Elena wasn't used to small kindnesses from people like him. The train stopped at her station, and Elena climbed the stairs to street level. Her neighborhood was very different from the fancy hotel district. Broken streetlights, graffiti on walls, and the constant sound of traffic. But it was home. She climbed 3 flights of stairs to her tiny apartment. The hallway smelled like cooking oil and cleaning products. Elena fumbled with her keys, exhaustion making her clumsy. "Mama?" came a small voice as Elena opened the door. Maya was supposed to be asleep, but she was sitting on the couch with Mrs. Rodriguez, their elderly neighbor who watched her when Elena worked late. "Hi, baby," Elena said, kneeling down to hug her daughter. Maya was 6 years old but looked younger because of her condition. She was pale and thin, but her eyes sparkled with intelligence and love. "How do you feel?" Elena asked, pressing her hand to Maya's forehead. "No fever, which was good." "I'm okay, Mama. Mrs. Rodriguez made me soup." Elena looked gratefully at their neighbor. "Thank you so much. I don't know what I'd do without you." The old woman patted Elena's shoulder. "Don't mention it, Mia. This little angel is never any trouble." After Mrs. Rodriguez left, Elena tucked Maya into bed and then sat at their small kitchen table. She carefully unwrapped the sandwiches she had taken from the hotel. There were 4 of them, enough for Maya's lunch tomorrow and maybe breakfast too. Elena allowed herself one small bite. The bread was soft and fresh, the meat tender and flavorful. It was delicious, but she wrapped the rest back up and put them in the refrigerator. She looked at the bills stacked on the counter. Rent, electricity, Maya's medical bills, groceries. The numbers never seemed to add up right. No matter how hard she worked, there was always more month than money. Elena pulled out her laptop, an old machine she had bought secondhand. She had 2 hours before she needed to sleep, and she wanted to finish her nursing school assignment. It was taking her twice as long to get her degree because she could only afford part-time classes, but she was determined to finish. If she could become a nurse, she could earn better money. She could give Maya a better life. Maybe they could even move to a safer neighborhood. As she typed her essay about patient care, Elena thought again about the man at the party. His kindness had touched something in her heart that she had almost forgotten existed. In her world of constant struggle, genuine human warmth was rare and precious. She had no idea that her whispered words, "I can't eat more," would echo in Alexander Chen's mind for weeks to come. She couldn't have imagined that this brief encounter would change both their lives forever. Alexander couldn't stop thinking about the waitress with the tired eyes. 3 days had passed since the charity gala, but Elena's words kept replaying in his mind. "I can't eat more," she had whispered, but something about the way she said it didn't make sense. He sat in his corner office on the 40th floor, looking out at the city below. His assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Chen, the quarterly reports are ready for your review." "Thank you, Lisa, just leave them on my desk." But Alexander couldn't concentrate on profit margins and growth projections. He kept picturing Elena's embarrassed face when she thought he had caught her doing something wrong. What had she been hiding? That evening, instead of going to his usual expensive restaurant, Alexander found himself driving to the neighborhood where the catering company was located. He wanted to learn more about the woman who had sparked his curiosity. The next day, he called the catering manager. "I'm planning another event." Alexander lied smoothly. There was a particular server at the charity gala who was very professional. "Elena, I believe her name was. I'd like to request her specifically." "Oh, Elena Rodriguez," the manager said. "She's one of our best workers. Very reliable, never causes problems. But I should mention she only works part-time with us. She has another job during the day." Alexander thanked the manager and hung up. Elena Rodriguez. Now he had a full name. He felt slightly guilty about what he did next, but his curiosity had turned into genuine concern. Alexander hired a private investigator, not to spy on Elena, but to understand her situation better. Something told him there was more to her story. The report came back 2 days later, and Alexander's heart sank as he read it. Elena Rodriguez, age 28, was a single mother working 3 jobs to support her 6-year-old daughter Maya. She worked at Tony's Diner during the day, took catering jobs in the evenings, and cleaned office buildings on weekends. She was also taking online nursing classes at the community college, studying late into the night after her daughter was asleep. But the most heartbreaking part was Maya's medical condition. The little girl had a chronic autoimmune disorder that required expensive medication and regular doctor visits. Elena's ex-partner had abandoned them shortly after Maya's diagnosis, leaving Elena to handle everything alone. The investigator's report included financial details that made Alexander's chest tighten. Elena was 3 months behind on rent. She had maxed out 2 credit cards paying for Maya's medical bills. Last month, she had sold her car and now took public transportation everywhere, adding 2 hours to her daily commute. The report also mentioned something that surprised Alexander. Despite her own struggles, Elena volunteered at a local food bank every Sunday, helping families who were even worse off than she was. Alexander set the report down and stared out his window. He had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes, yet this woman who could barely afford groceries was giving her time to help others. The next Sunday, Alexander did something he had never done before. He drove to the food bank where Elena volunteered. The building was old and needed repairs, but it buzzed with activity. Volunteers sorted donated food while families waited in line for assistance. Alexander spotted Elena immediately. She was kneeling next to a little boy, probably around Maya's age, helping him pick out cereal from the donation bins. "What kind do you like?" Elena asked the boy gently. "I don't know," the child said shyly. "Mama says we can't be picky." "Well," Elena said with a warm smile, "I think we can find something you'll really enjoy. My daughter loves this one with the colorful pieces. Want to try it?" The boy nodded eagerly and Elena placed the box in his family's bag. Alexander watched from across the room, amazed. Elena looked different here than she had at the fancy hotel. She seemed more herself, more relaxed. Her face lit up as she helped each family, taking time to chat with the children and listen to their parents' concerns. An elderly volunteer noticed Alexander standing near the entrance. "First time here?" the man asked. "I'm Robert, one of the coordinators. Are you looking to volunteer or—" "Actually, I was hoping to make a donation," Alexander said quickly. Robert's face brightened. "That's wonderful. We can always use more support. Elena over there has been trying to get us funding for a new refrigeration system. Ours is on its last legs." Alexander glanced back at Elena, who was now loading boxes into a cart for an elderly woman. "How long has Elena been volunteering here?" Alexander asked. "About 2 years now. Never misses a Sunday, even when she's clearly exhausted from working all week. She's special, that one. Always puts others first, even though—" Robert paused, seeming to realize he might be sharing too much. "Even though what?" Robert looked around, then lowered his voice. "Well, between you and me, I think Elena could probably use our services herself. I've seen how thin she's gotten, and she mentioned once that her daughter has medical issues. But she'd never ask for help. Too proud, I guess." Alexander felt a knot form in his stomach. Elena was so busy helping others that she was neglecting her own needs. He spent another hour at the food bank, watching Elena work. She treated every person with dignity and respect, never rushing anyone or making them feel ashamed for needing help. When a young mother started crying because she couldn't afford baby formula, Elena quietly slipped her some cash from her own wallet. That small gesture broke Alexander's heart. Here was a woman who barely had enough money for her own family, yet she was giving what little she had to help others. After leaving the food bank, Alexander sat in his car for a long time thinking. He had built his fortune by being smart, strategic, and sometimes ruthless in business. But watching Elena had shown him a different kind of strength. The strength to remain kind when life was cruel. The strength to give when you had nothing left to give. He thought about his own life. He lived in a mansion he rarely saw because he worked so much. He had more cars than he could drive and more clothes than he could wear. He attended charity galas and wrote checks, but when was the last time he had actually helped someone with his own hands? When was the last time he had looked into someone's eyes and seen them as a real person with real struggles? Alexander made a decision that night. He was going to help Elena, but he would do it carefully. He had a feeling that she was too proud to accept direct charity, especially from a stranger. He would have to be creative. The next morning, Alexander called the hospital where Maya received her treatment. "I'd like to establish an anonymous fund to help families who are struggling with medical bills," he told the billing department. "Specifically, I want to help children with autoimmune disorders." "That's very generous, sir. Do you have specific families in mind?" "I'll leave that to your discretion. Just make sure the families who need it most are helped first." Alexander knew that Elena and Maya would be at the top of that list. He also contacted the community college where Elena was taking nursing classes. "I'd like to create a scholarship fund for single mothers pursuing healthcare careers," he explained to the financial aid office. "What wonderful timing," the counselor said. "We have several students who would benefit greatly from this kind of support." Again, Alexander was confident that Elena would qualify. Over the next few weeks, Alexander found himself thinking about Elena constantly. He wondered if Maya was feeling better, if Elena was getting enough sleep, if they had enough food in their refrigerator. He had never felt this invested in another person's well-being before. It was a strange feeling for someone who had spent his adult life focused primarily on business success. Alexander realized that Elena's whispered words at the charity gala had awakened something in him that had been sleeping for years. His conscience, his humanity, his understanding that true wealth wasn't about what you accumulated, but about what you gave away. He just hoped that his anonymous help would reach Elena before it was too late. He had seen the exhaustion in her eyes, the way her hands shook slightly from overwork and stress. She was pushing herself to the breaking point, and Alexander was determined to catch her before she fell. Elena stared at the letter in her hands, reading it for the third time. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Dear Ms. Rodriguez," the letter began, "we are pleased to inform you that Maya Rodriguez has been selected to receive medical assistance through our new pediatric care fund. This program will cover all treatment costs for qualifying patients with autoimmune disorders." Elena sank onto her couch, the letter trembling in her shaking hands. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. "Mama," Maya called from the kitchen where she was coloring at their small table. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, baby," Elena managed to say, though tears were streaming down her face. Mama just got some very good news. It had been 6 weeks since the charity gala, and Elena's life had taken several unexpected turns. First came the call from the hospital about Maya's medical bills being covered. Then the community college called to say she had been awarded a full scholarship for her nursing program. Yesterday, she had even received a package of grocery vouchers in the mail, apparently from a random drawing she didn't remember entering. Elena wiped her eyes and looked around their tiny apartment. For the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe. The constant weight of financial panic was lifting from her shoulders, but she couldn't shake the feeling that these good things weren't random at all. They seemed too perfectly timed, too specifically designed to help her exact situation. "Maya, baby, how would you feel about Mama taking you to see Dr. Peterson next week?" Elena asked. Maya's condition had been worsening lately, and Elena had been putting off the appointment because she couldn't afford it. "Will it hurt?" Maya asked, her big brown eyes serious. "Just a little pinch for the blood test," Elena said gently. "But Dr. Peterson wants to try a new medicine that might make you feel much better." Maya nodded bravely. At 6 years old, she had already endured more medical procedures than most adults. The next week, Elena took Maya to see the specialist. Dr. Peterson was amazed by Maya's progress since starting the new treatment. "I have to say, Helena, I'm surprised you were able to afford this medication," Dr. Peterson said during the appointment. "It's quite expensive, even with insurance." "The hospital said it was covered by some kind of fund," Elena explained. Dr. Peterson nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, we've had several families benefit from this new program. It's been a blessing for so many children." After the appointment, Elena and Maya stopped at the hospital cafe for a rare treat, hot chocolate and cookies. As they sat at a small table near the window, Elena noticed a familiar figure across the room. It was the man from the charity gala, Alexander Chen. He was talking quietly with a doctor, and Elena could see him glancing in their direction. Elena's heart began to race. What was he doing here? Was it just a coincidence? Alexander looked up and their eyes met across the crowded cafe. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Alexander walked over to their table. "Elena, isn't it?" he said with a gentle smile. "From the charity dinner?" "Yes, sir," Elena replied, instinctively straightening in her chair. "This is my daughter, Maya." "Hello, Maya," Alexander said, crouching down to the little girl's eye level. "That's a very pretty drawing you're working on." Maya had been coloring a picture of flowers and butterflies. She looked up at Alexander with curious eyes. "Thank you," she said politely. "Mama says I'm a good artist." "I think your mama is absolutely right," Alexander said. He looked back at Elena. "I hope you don't mind me asking, but is everything all right?" "I know hospitals can be stressful places," Elena hesitated. Part of her wanted to tell this kind stranger about Maya's condition, about the amazing luck they'd been having lately. But another part of her was cautious. Rich people didn't usually care about the problems of poor families. "Maya has been sick for a while," Elena said carefully, "but the doctors say she's getting better." "I'm very glad to hear that." Alexander said, and Elena could tell he meant it. Something in his voice made Elena study his face more carefully. There was genuine concern there, not just polite interest. "Mr. Chen," Elena said slowly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why are you being so kind to us?" "Most people like you? Well, they don't usually notice people like me." Alexander was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I've been thinking a lot lately about what really matters in life. About the difference between success and significance." Elena didn't entirely understand what he meant, but she could see that he was being honest with her. "Also," Alexander continued, "I was impressed by something I saw at the charity dinner. You were working so hard that night, but you still took time to help other people. That says something important about who you are." Elena felt her cheeks warm. "I was just doing my job." "No," Alexander said firmly. "You were doing much more than that. I watched you help an elderly gentleman who dropped his cane. You said please and thank you to everyone, even the people who were rude to you. That's not in any job description." Elena looked down at her hands. She wasn't used to being praised for basic kindness. "Maya," Alexander said, turning back to the little girl, "what's your favorite subject in school?" "Math," Maya said excitedly. "I'm really good with numbers. Mama says I might be a scientist someday." "A scientist," Alexander repeated thoughtfully. "That's wonderful. The world needs more smart scientists like you." Elena watched this interaction with growing amazement. Alexander wasn't talking down to Maya or treating her like a sick child. He was speaking to her like she was interesting and important. "Mr. Chen," Elena said quietly, "I want to thank you." "For what?" "I'm not completely sure yet, but I have a feeling you've done more for my family than you're admitting." Alexander's expression didn't change, but Elena saw something flicker in his eyes. "I think you're giving me too much credit," he said. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm finally figuring out what's been happening to us." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Maya color her picture. "Elena," Alexander said finally, "would you mind if I asked you a personal question?" Elena nodded. "That night at the dinner when I offered you food, you said you couldn't eat more, but you looked hungry. I've been wondering about that ever since." Elena felt her face flush with embarrassment. She glanced at Maya, who was absorbed in her coloring, then looked back at Alexander. "I wasn't hungry for myself," she said quietly. I was hungry, but I was taking food home for Maya. I couldn't afford to buy her anything nice, and there was so much waste at that party." Understanding dawned in Alexander's eyes. "You were saving room for her." "Everything I do is for her," Elena said simply. "That's what being a mother means." Alexander nodded slowly. He was beginning to understand that Elena's love for her daughter was the driving force behind everything she did. The 3 jobs, the late-night studying, the volunteering despite her own needs, it all came back to Maya. "Elena," Alexander said, "I want to ask you something, and I hope you'll consider it carefully." Elena waited. "I've been thinking about starting a foundation to help working families like yours who are doing everything right but still struggling because the system is stacked against them." Elena's eyes widened. "I would need someone to help run it. Someone who understands what these families are going through because they've lived it themselves. Someone with compassion and integrity." "You mean me?" Elena whispered. "I mean you." Elena stared at him, speechless. A job working for a foundation would mean better pay, regular hours, and the chance to help other families facing the same struggles she knew so well. But it also seemed too good to be true. "Why would you trust me with something so important?" Eleanor asked. "You barely know me." "Actually," Alexander said with a small smile, "I think I know you better than you realize. And what I know tells me that you're exactly the kind of person who should be in charge of helping others." Elena looked down at Maya, who was now drawing a picture of their apartment building. "Can I think about it?" Elena asked. "Of course. Take all the time you need." As Alexander prepared to leave, Maya looked up from her drawing. "Mr. Chen," she said, "are you the one who's been helping us?" Elena held her breath. Out of the mouths of babes. Alexander knelt down to Maya's level again. "What makes you ask that, sweetheart?" "Because," Maya said with 6-year-old logic, "ever since Mama met you, good things have been happening to us. And you have kind eyes like someone who helps people." Alexander looked at Elena, then back at Maya. "Your daughter is very smart." "Yes," Elena said softly, She is. Alexander stood up and pulled out his business card. Elena, my offer is sincere. When you're ready to talk, please call me. After he left, Elena sat in the cafe for a long time staring at the business card. Her life was changing in ways she had never imagined possible. And somehow, she knew it was all connected to the billionaire with kind eyes who had seen her as more than just a struggling waitress. 6 months later, Elena stood in front of the mirror in her new apartment, adjusting the jacket of her professional suit. The woman looking back at her seemed like a stranger. Gone were the dark circles under her eyes and the constant worried expression. This Elena looked confident, healthy, and hopeful. Maya appeared in the doorway, wearing her school uniform and carrying her backpack. Mama, you look beautiful, the little girl said, hugging Elena's legs. Thank you, baby. Are you ready for school? Maya nodded enthusiastically. Her health had improved dramatically with the new treatment, and she was thriving in her new school. Elena could hardly believe how much their lives had changed. Elena had accepted Alexander's job offer after much consideration and discussion with Mrs. Rodriguez, who had become like a grandmother to Maya. The position as director of the Chen Family Foundation came with a salary that was 3 times what Elena had made working her 3 jobs combined. But more importantly, it gave her the chance to help families facing the same struggles she had endured for so long. Tonight was another charity gala, but this time Elena would be attending as a guest rather than serving tables. The foundation was being officially announced and Elena would be introduced as its director. She still felt nervous about these events. Despite her new clothes and confidence, Elena sometimes felt like she was pretending to belong in Alexander's world. Elena dropped Maya off at school and headed to the foundation's office. The space was modern and bright, with floor-to-ceiling windows and comfortable meeting areas designed to make visitors feel welcome rather than intimidated. Her assistant, Jenny, greeted her with a stack of applications from families seeking help. These came in yesterday, Jenny said. I've already done the initial screening. All of them qualify for assistance. Elena settled at her desk and began reviewing the files. Each application told a story she knew by heart. Single mothers working multiple jobs, families choosing between rent and medicine, children going hungry because their parents couldn't afford both food and utilities. Mrs. Chen called, Jenny said, referring to Alexander's mother. She wants to discuss the scholarship program for your presentation tonight. Elena smiled. Alexander's mother had become an unexpected ally. When Alexander first told his parents about hiring Elena to run the foundation, they had been skeptical. But after meeting Elena and hearing her story, Mrs. Chen had become one of the foundation's strongest supporters. I'll call her back this afternoon, Elena said. Any word from Mr. Chen about tonight? He's flying back from Tokyo this morning. He should be here by 3. Elena nodded and returned to the applications. She had learned to trust her instincts about which families needed help most urgently. Sometimes it was the single father who hadn't asked for food assistance, but whose application showed he was working 80 hours a week. Sometimes it was the grandmother raising her grandchildren who was too proud to admit she was skipping meals to feed them. Around 2 o'clock, Elena heard familiar voices in the outer office. Alexander had arrived with his business partner, David, and they were discussing the foundation's first quarter results. Elena, Alexander said, appearing in her doorway. Do you have a few minutes to talk before tonight? Of course. They walked to the conference room, where David was setting up presentation materials. The numbers are impressive, David said to Elena. In 6 months, the foundation has helped over 200 families. The medical assistance program alone has covered treatment for 50 children. Elena felt a warm glow of satisfaction. Behind each number was a real family whose life had been changed. There's something I want to discuss with you, Alexander said to Elena. We've been invited to speak at a conference next month about innovative approaches to poverty assistance. They want both of us to present our model. Elena's stomach fluttered with nerves. You mean speak in front of hundreds of people? I know it's intimidating, Alexander said gently, but your perspective is crucial. You understand these issues in a way that I never could. Elena thought about the families whose applications she had reviewed that morning. They deserved to have their stories told by someone who truly understood their struggles. Okay, she said finally. I'll do it, Alexander smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. As they continued preparing for the evening, Elena reflected on how much her relationship with Alexander had evolved. In the beginning, she had been intimidated by his wealth and status. She had expected him to be disconnected from the real world, concerned only with profit margins and tax benefits. Instead, she had discovered a man who genuinely cared about making a difference. Alexander spent hours reading application files and visiting families the foundation was helping. He remembered names, asked about children's schoolwork, and celebrated small victories like job promotions and improved health. But Elena had also challenged Alexander in ways that surprised both of them. She had pushed back when his ideas seemed too removed from practical reality. She had insisted on policies that prioritized dignity and empowerment over simple charity. People don't just need money, Elena had explained during one of their early planning meetings. They need to feel like they have control over their lives, like they're partners in their own recovery. This philosophy had become central to how the foundation operated. Instead of just writing checks, they provided job training, educational support, and long-term mentoring. That evening, Elena arrived at the hotel ballroom where the charity gala was being held. It was the same venue where she had first met Alexander, but everything felt different now. She walked through the cocktail reception, greeting donors and community leaders. These were the same types of people she had served months earlier, but now they treated her as an equal. She was no longer invisible. "Elena," called a familiar voice. She turned to see Dr. Peterson, Maya's doctor, approaching with his wife. "I'm so glad you're here," he said warmly. "I wanted you to know that the Foundation's medical assistance program has been life-changing for our pediatric patients." "Thank you," Elena said. "That means everything to me." As they chatted, Elena noticed a young woman in a catering uniform clearing nearby tables. The woman looked tired and stressed, and Elena could see her carefully wrapping leftover appetizers in napkins. Elena's heart skipped a beat. She was looking at herself from 6 months ago. "Excuse me," Elena said to Dr. Peterson and walked over to the young woman. "Hi," Elena said gently. "I'm Elena Rodriguez, director of the Chen Family Foundation." The woman looked up nervously. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Was I doing something wrong?" "Not at all," Elena said. "I just wanted to tell you that I've been where you are. If you ever need help, please don't hesitate to reach out to our foundation." Elena handed the woman her business card. "We help working families who are struggling to make ends meet." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "I have a little boy at home and things have been really hard since my husband lost his job." "I understand completely," Elena said. "Call me tomorrow, okay?" The woman nodded and slipped the card into her pocket. When Elena rejoined the reception, Alexander was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "That was beautifully done," he said quietly. "I saw myself in her," Elena explained. 6 months ago, that was me." "No," Alexander said thoughtfully. 6 months ago, that was your situation. But the woman I just watched show compassion to a stranger, that's who you've always been." As the evening progressed, Elena gave a presentation about the foundation's work. She spoke about the families they had helped, the children who were now healthy and thriving, the parents who had found stable employment. "When I first met Mr. Chen," Elena said, addressing the crowd, "I was working 3 jobs and could barely afford my daughter's medicine. I thought rich people lived in a completely different world from mine." She paused, looking out at the audience of wealthy donors. "What I've learned is that we all want the same things. We want our children to be healthy and happy. We want to feel like our lives have meaning. We want to know that someone cares about us." Elena's voice grew stronger as she continued. "The difference is that some of us have the resources to achieve these things easily, while others struggle every day just to survive. But when we work together, when we see each other as real people with real stories, we can create change that transforms entire communities." The audience gave Elena a standing ovation, but she barely noticed. She was thinking about Maya, asleep at home with Mrs. Rodriguez babysitting. She was thinking about the young mother she had met earlier, and about all the families whose applications were sitting on her desk. After the presentation, a woman approached Elena. She was elegantly dressed and carried herself with the confidence that came from wealth. "Ms. Rodriguez," the woman said, "my name is Catherine Williams. I was very moved by your speech." "Thank you, Mrs. Williams. I want to ask you something directly," Catherine continued. "How do I know that the money I donate actually helps people? I've given to charities before, but I never really know what impact I'm making." Elena smiled. This was a question she heard often from potential donors. Would you like to meet some of the families we've helped? Elena asked. We organize volunteer days where donors can work directly with the families in our programs. You can see exactly where your money goes and build real relationships with the people you're helping. Catherine's eyes lit up. I would love that. As Elena exchanged contact information with Catherine, she felt Alexander's presence beside her. Ready to change another life? He asked quietly. Elena looked around the ballroom at the donors who were beginning to understand that charity wasn't about writing checks from a distance. It was about seeing people as individuals with dignity and potential. Always, Elena replied. She thought about her whispered words from that night 6 months ago. I can't eat more. Now she understood that those words had been the beginning of something much larger than she could have imagined. Sometimes the smallest moments create the biggest changes. And sometimes when you think you can't take any more, the universe surprises you with exactly what you need. 1 year after that first charity gala, Elena stood in the foundation's new community center, watching Alexander help a group of children with their homework. He was sitting cross-legged on the floor, completely absorbed in explaining fractions to a 7-year-old boy named Tommy. Mr. Alex, Tommy said, tugging on Alexander's sleeve. My mom says you used to be really rich, but now you're just regular rich. What's the difference? Elena had to cover her mouth to hide her smile. Alexander's expression was priceless. Well, Tommy, Alexander said thoughtfully, I think your mom means that I used to spend my money on things that only made me happy. Now I spend it on things that make lots of people happy, and that feels much better. Tommy nodded seriously as if this made perfect sense, then returned to his math worksheet. Elena walked over to where Alexander was sitting. Regular rich? She whispered teasingly. Apparently that's my new status, Alexander said with a grin. I've been downgraded. In the past year, Alexander had indeed made dramatic changes to his lifestyle. He had sold his mansion and moved to a modest home in the same neighborhood as the community center. He had reduced his business portfolio to focus more time on the foundation, and he had started spending his Saturdays teaching financial literacy classes to the families they served. Elena, called Jenny from across the room, Mrs. Patterson is here for her interview. Elena nodded and walked to her office, where a middle-aged woman was waiting nervously. Mrs. Patterson had applied for assistance after her husband's factory job was eliminated. Please sit down, Elena said warmly. Tell me about your family. Over the next hour, Elena listened to Mrs. Patterson's story. It was familiar yet unique, like all the stories she heard. A working family hit by circumstances beyond their control, trying to maintain dignity while everything fell apart around them. I've never had to ask for help before, Mrs. Patterson said, wiping her eyes. It's so embarrassing. There's nothing embarrassing about needing support, Elena said gently. We all need help sometimes. The difference is that some people have family money or connections to fall back on. You're just accessing a different kind of safety net. After Mrs. Patterson left, Elena found Alexander in the center's kitchen, where he was helping prepare lunch for the after-school program. How was the interview? He asked, chopping vegetables for a salad. She reminds me of myself 2 years ago, Elena said. Proud, scared, trying to hold everything together for her kids. Alexander nodded. He had learned to read the subtle signs of families in crisis. The carefully hidden worry lines, the clothes that were clean but worn, the way parents watch their children with a mixture of love and fear. I have something to tell you, Elena said, sitting on a stool beside the prep table. I got a call from the Department of Health and Human Services this morning. Alexander looked up from his vegetables. Good news or bad news? Good news. They want to use our model as a pilot program for a national initiative. If it works, they could implement it in 50 cities across the country. Alexander set down his knife and stared at Elena. Are you serious? Completely serious. They've been studying our outcomes for the past 6 months. The success rates are higher than anything they've seen before. Alexander's face broke into a huge smile. Elena, do you realize what this means? It means we could help thousands of families instead of hundreds. It means your ideas could change how this country approaches poverty assistance. Elena felt a familiar flutter of nerves mixed with excitement. The scared, exhausted waitress who had whispered, I can't eat more at a charity gala would never have imagined she could influence national policy. There's one catch, Elena continued. They want us to relocate to Washington for 6 months to oversee the implementation. Alexander's expression grew more serious.
What do you think about that?
I think it's an incredible opportunity, but I'm worried about Maya. She's finally settled in her school, she has friends, and her health is stable. What if we made it work for both of you? Maya could come with us. We could find her a great school in Washington, and Mrs. Rodriguez could visit whenever she wants. Elena smiled. Alexander had become like family to them over the past year. Maya adored him, calling him Uncle Alex and expecting him at every important event in her life. Actually, Elena said, I think Maya would love the adventure. She told me yesterday that she wants to be president someday so she can help poor kids like she used to be. That little girl is going to change the world, Alexander said with conviction. Speaking of changing the world, Elena said, I have something else to tell you. Alexander raised an eyebrow. Catherine Williams called this morning. She wants to start a foundation of her own, based on what she's learned volunteering with us. Catherine had become one of their most dedicated volunteers after that first conversation at the charity gala. She spent every Tuesday working directly with families and had recruited dozens of her wealthy friends to do the same. She's not the only one, Elena continued. We've had inquiries from donors in 5 other cities who want to replicate our model. Alexander shook his head in amazement. When I first saw you at that dinner, I thought I was just curious about one person's story. I had no idea it would lead to all this. Do you ever regret it? Elena asked. Giving up your old life? Alexander considered the question seriously. He looked around the community center, where children were laughing as they worked on art projects, where parents were attending job training classes, where elderly volunteers were sharing stories with young families. Elena, he said finally, my old life was empty. I had everything money could buy, but I felt like I was sleepwalking through my days. Now I wake up every morning knowing that what I do matters. I've never been happier. Elena understood exactly what he meant. Despite the long hours and emotional challenges of their work, she felt more fulfilled than she ever had before. There's something I need to say to you, Elena said, her voice growing more serious. Alexander looked at her expectantly. I know it was you, all of it. Maya's medical bills, my scholarship, the grocery vouchers. I've known for months. Alexander's face flushed slightly. Elena, I'm not angry, Elena said quickly. I'm grateful. But I need you to know that your kindness didn't just save my family. It taught me something important about the kind of person I want to be. What do you mean? Before I met you, I was so focused on just surviving that I had forgotten about living. You showed me that even when you have very little, you can still make a difference in someone else's life. Elena paused, gathering her thoughts. When I was struggling, I volunteered at the food bank because helping others made me feel less powerless. But I never imagined I could do anything bigger than that. You saw potential in me that I didn't see in myself. Alexander's eyes were bright with emotion. Elena, you're giving me too much credit. All I did was provide some financial support. Everything else, your strength, your compassion, your leadership, that was already there. Maybe. But you believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. And now look what we've built together. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the activity around them. Children were playing games while their parents attended classes. Volunteers were helping families plan budgets and apply for jobs. Former program participants were now mentoring new families. Elena, Alexander said quietly, there's something I want to ask you. What? That night at the dinner when you said you couldn't eat more, what were you really thinking in that moment? Elena smiled, remembering that scared, exhausted woman she had been. I was thinking that I had to be careful with every single bite of food because Maya was waiting at home. I was thinking that people like you lived in a completely different world from people like me. And I was thinking that I was so tired of being invisible. And now, Elena looked around the bustling community center, thought about the hundreds of families they had helped, the national program they were about to launch, the little girl who now dreamed of being president. Now I think that sometimes when you whisper you can't take any more, the universe is actually preparing to give you everything you never knew you needed. Alexander nodded thoughtfully. You know what I learned from you? What? That true wealth isn't about how much you can accumulate. It's about how much you can give away while still having enough to share more. Maya appeared in the kitchen doorway, home from school and looking for Elena. Mama, Uncle Alex, she called excitedly. Guess what happened at school today? What, baby? Elena asked, scooping Maya into a hug. My teacher said I could give a presentation about our foundation to the whole school. I want to tell everyone how helping people makes you feel rich inside. Elena and Alexander exchanged a look over Maya's head. Out of the mouths of babes, that sounds like a wonderful presentation, Alexander said. Maybe you could invite some of your classmates to volunteer with us. Really? Maya's eyes lit up. They would love that. As Maya chattered about her presentation plans, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, she couldn't have imagined sitting in her own community center, planning a national program, watching her daughter dream about changing the world. Sometimes the most profound transformations begin with the smallest encounters. A wealthy man notices a struggling waitress. A mother whispers that she can't eat more. A billionaire learns that true fulfillment comes not from accumulating wealth, but from using it to lift others up. Elena had learned that when you think you've reached your limit, when you whisper that you can't take any more, that's often the moment when everything changes. That's when the universe conspires to show you that you're stronger than you knew, that your struggles have prepared you for a purpose you never imagined. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that's when you discover that the most important wealth isn't what you save for yourself, but what you're able to give away to others. The little girl who had once gone to bed hungry now dreamed of feeding the world. The waitress who had wrapped sandwiches in napkins now ran a foundation that would change national policy. And the billionaire who had once measured success in dollars now measured it in transformed lives. Elena's whispered words had become a philosophy that guided everything they did. When someone says they can't take any more, that's when they need the most help. And when you have the power to help, you have the responsibility to act. In the end, Elena realized, the most profound wealth is the ability to turn your pain into purpose, your struggle into strength, and your whispered fears into someone else's answered prayers.